What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is iRate Reviews, the show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something to go back to the comic book shop for or not. What I'm going to be talking about is Justice League vs. Suicide Squad number 2. So Justice League vs. Suicide Squad is the big DC crossover event that is happening over the course of the winter, and this is really a spectacle story that's really tied to something along the lines of, say, like a big summer blockbuster movie. It's really kind of about that, not necessarily the depth of the actual story itself. So let's just jump right into the action on this one. Where we kind of last left off in Justice League vs. Suicide Squad number 1 is that the Suicide Squad, under the direction of Amanda Waller, is being forced to actually fight the Justice League and try to get past them, like not necessarily beat them, but essentially escape captivity so that way they don't get their heads blown off. And what we see is more of that to begin the book in this one. And what we see is that thanks to a little bit of a key hint from Batman as he's fighting Deatdshot gets the great idea that they need to individually split up, because as a team, the Justice League is kind of an ass kicker, but as individuals, these characters might be able to take them on their own. And that becomes very interesting because it sets up a series of different events where you've got individual characters that might not necessarily compete against each other kind of going at it. While that's going on, we have Maxwell Lord and his kind of group of escapees really kind of coming together to create their own team and go on their own specific adventure, but we don't really have any details on that yet, and I assume that we're going to get more as these issues go on. But it's one thing's for sure, it's really cool to see Lobo back. The main man calling some people bastiches is just, man, it's a throwback to the 1990s, and I love every second of that. But what it comes down to is that you've got individual conflicts between these characters, superhero versus Suicide Squad member. Of course, we see Deatdshot taking on Batman, and we just see Deatdshot pounding bullets into the chest of Bruce Wayne, but it's just one of those things where that bat armor can really take a beating. Then you also have a situation where Diablo is going up against the Green Lanterns, and he feels a little bit frustrated because they're not necessarily real Green Lanterns in his eyes. It's just like, come on, man, you insulted me. It's just like, you can't even bring real Green Lanterns to this fight, and it's just really kind of cool to see him take on that perception. And these are things that Simon and Jessica Field themselves are like, well, maybe we're not really Green Lanterns. But yeah, the three-headed dragon of fire versus the Green Lantern rings, really cool spectacle kind of sight. Of course, you have the Flash versus Captain Boomerang, which is obviously a fight that you'd expect because he is one of the rogues, and the rogues aren't necessarily returned yet, but it's definitely a cool story to see. Killer Croc versus Aquaman is surprisingly interesting, especially after Killer Croc essentially destroys this great white that gets called upon by Aquaman, but finds out the hard way that Aquaman is a lot more powerful than most people expect. The fight between Superman and Enchantress is pretty cool too, because Enchantress is just like, she goes the deceptive route and then kind of knocks him for a loop with her magic, and she finds out that, oh, the big man has got some weaknesses and it happens to be magic. I can do this. This is pretty cool. And the final one that we kind of get to is Killer Frost versus Cyborg, where we kind of get a little bit more of a sense of how she works as an energy vampire. So instead of actually creating like Iceman style, like taking the moisture and converting it into actual ice, it turns out that she is taking her power source, like her energy source is the life force or the forces of other individuals, and then she converts that into that ice power. So that's an odd take on Killer Frost's powers, but I guess I can roll with it as she kind of sucks the life force out of Cyborg. Oh yeah, we can totally skip over Harley versus Wonder Woman, because Harley steals a motorcycle and then jumps it back at Wonder Woman. There's no way that Wonder Woman's going to lose. So that's like the final one. But then we get back into like the actual group, where we see that a lot of these people have been captured, and then ultimately Enchantress just smashes Superman into the ground. Amanda Waller jumps on the action, tells Killer Frost to go take his life force because he's powered by the sun, and she just unleashes this torrent of ice all across the place. And it's pretty cool scene. I mean, I'm wondering how much of the force she will retain. Like, will she retain the ability to kind of absorb energy from the sun and turn it into ice? Like, is she Rogue style from the X-Men? Can she like hold on to that power, or no? Probably not, but it would be kind of cool if she did, so that way she was always like powered up. That'd be kind of cool. But as we kind of finish things up, we see that the Suicide Squad is not really the Suicide Squad anymore, and now they have a whole bunch of new partners in Belle Reve prison, and that would be the members of the Justice League, who all have their own specific kind of catacomb tomb-like encampment. Their imprisonment is specifically for each of them. And Amanda Waller is just like, hey, we've got a bunch of new members of the Suicide Squad. And that's how the book ends. So when you're talking about Justice League versus Suicide Squad number 2, as far as like the depth of the story continues to be a little bit more towards the shallow end of the pool. However, I really like the development of Max Lord and his team of, like Polaris and all those kind of guys, or It just seems like it's going to be an interesting kind of caveat to everything. But what it comes down to is, I mean, I wasn't necessarily sure about the whole transition. I thought it was going to be more like a team-up book than it was going to be like the Suicide Squad attains victory through Killer Frost, and then ultimately the Justice League becomes a Suicide Squad. That feels like Amanda Waller's wielding a little bit too much power for me. But I'm still on board to see where this goes, because ultimately this just makes sense as far as this book is concerned. I am a little bit concerned about where everything else is going in continuity because of what's happening in Wonder Woman and other kind of things as this kind of unfolds. But luckily they're doing it over the course of 6 weeks and not like 7 months turned into 12 or something along those lines. So there's going to be releases that are on time. They're already kind of structured with the artist. The layouts are very similar, so it's got a consistent feel. So even though there was a different artist on this book, it didn't necessarily feel too different other than some individual panels where the art was clearly a much different art style. The overall structure of the book felt very similar. So Justice League versus Suicide Squad, as a little bit of a crossover event that's only going to last 6 weeks, looks to be a whole lot of fun, and I'm still going to be sticking on board with it. It's one that's got my attention, and I'd really recommend picking it up for anybody that wants a little bit more of that big blockbuster movie spectacle in comic book form. So that's my review of Justice League vs. Suicide Squad number 2, but I want to know what you guys thought about it too, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.